Greetings and welcome back to Haftarot, the weekly videocast in which we study together the upcoming week's Haftara, try to understand its basic message, and how it's related to the Kriyat Torah with which it is associated. My name is Yitzchak Etshalom, and I'm delighted to be studying the Haftara of this week's Parasha, Parashat Naso. Parashat Naso is famous for being the longest single parasha that we have in the Torah, 176 psukim. At least in the number of psukim, it's the longest, and it's not the longest when we combine two parashiot together. However, half of that parasha, 89 psukim, is a detailed description and a repeating description of the dedication of the Mishkan. In the passage that precedes that, immediately we have the Birchat Kohanim. And immediately before the Birchat Kohanim, we have the detailed presentation of the laws of the Nazir, the Nazirite. And it is to the Nazir that the Haftara turns its attention. As we saw, for instance, in the case of Tzarat, when we learned about the laws of Tzarat, the Haftara was a story about Mitzoraim. When we learned about the story of Sarah having a baby at an advanced age, we learned the story about the Shunamit having a baby at an advanced age. And in the same way here, we have the law of the Nazir. We're going to hear a story about a Nazir. And if you ask, where am I going to find a story about a Nazir in Nevi'im? The answer is pretty straightforward. Shimshon, the most famous Nazir of all time, and really the only Nazir recorded as a Nazir by name in Tanakh. So therefore, the story of Shimshon makes a lot of sense. Now, the story of Shimshon takes place over the course of 4 chapters in Shoftim. That's a lot of press for Sefer Shoftim. However, Shimshon's annunciation story is, as we refer to it, which is the revelation of an angel to Shimshon's mother and then Shimshon's father to tell them that they're going to have a baby and that the baby is going to be a Nazir Elohim. We'll come back to that, and that and what they themselves have to avoid: drinking wine and eating grape products, etc. He's going to be a Nazir Elohim. And then he may never have a razor on his head, and he may never cut his hair. And the Haftara ends, the chapter ends, chapter 13 ends with finding out that Shimshon really is a very powerful man. And the hope, of course, is that he is going to liberate Am Yisrael from their Plishti oppressors at the time. However, the question is Shimshon really a Nazir? When you take a look at the story of Shimshon, you find that, first of all, of the laws of a Nazir, which are basically 3 areas of halacha. One is to not cut his hair. One is to not drink wine or have any contact with grape products. And the third, eating, that is, and the third is to not have any contact with the dead, even his own parents. He's very much like a Kohen Gadol in that way. The laws are the same. He doesn't become tamei even for his own family. Question is, does Shimshon fit that model? So the third one, he certainly doesn't fit that model because his job was to be a warrior, which means hand-to-hand combat, and kill people. And he kills 1,000 Plishtim here, and 1,000 Plishtim there, and 3,000 Plishtim there. So he could not be bound by the restriction of Tumat Meit. Is he really bound by the restriction of drinking wine? We actually only hear about a restriction about drinking wine as applies to his parents, but not to him. So it seems that the only area of Nazirut where Shimshon really is a Nazir is about the hair. So the question is, what does the word Nazir mean? Now, parenthetically, the halachic framework of Nazirut as applied to Shimshon took on a life of its own. And in the Mishnah, we have a regular Nazir and a Nazir Shimshon. So if somebody makes a vow in which they allude to Shimshon, or the son of Manoach, or the fellow who had an affair with Delilah, then that may be a valid neder, as you could see here in the Mishnah from the beginning of Masechet Nazir in the second Mishnah. However, even within that context, a Nazir Shimshon has different rules. A Nazir Shimshon has no prohibition against having contact with the dead, right? He does not bring the special Korban Tumah if he does, which a regular Nazir would. And his Nazirut is not interrupted or torn up as it is in the case of regular Nazir. But the question is, when we look at the story itself, he doesn't seem to be a Nazir, at least in the classic sense. So the question is, what is Nazir? So the answer is Nazir means 2 different things. It comes from 2 different words. The word Nazir means someone who has separated himself. And indeed, a Nazir is someone who separated himself from the ways of the world. On the other hand, a Nazir wears a nezer. A nezer is a crown. And indeed, Yosef, Yaakov, on his deathbed, when he blesses his son, he refers to Yosef as Nazir Echav, which may mean separated from his brother and may allude to the crown that Yosef ended up wearing in Egypt. So, question is, what kind of Nazir is Shimshon? And it seems that Shimshon is a Nazir who wears a nezer, meaning he wears this special crown of his hair that it frightens the enemies. It's part of his physical might. And as long as he's got that, his physical might is with him. We don't understand why the minute that Delilah cuts his hair, he loses his strength. That is what it is. But as far as a Nazir goes, he's really a borrowed term from the world of Nazirut. We take a look here at the Haftara and we see again that it is the parents who are specifically warned against drinking wine. So I'd like to suggest a reason for that before we conclude. Shimshon, as we're promised, is going to be somebody of unbelievable might, otherworldly might, somebody who's going to, as we see in Parak Tet Zayin, the first couple of Psukim, Pasuk Gimel, he picks up the walls of the gates of the city of Gaza and carries them all the way to Hebron. Somebody with that tremendous might has the power to really defeat Am Yisrael's enemies. But as we all know, power like that can also be abused, and power like that has to be controlled. How do you take a child who was born with such superhuman strength and as a young man already demonstrates it? How do you train him to restrain? So perhaps that's what the command to the parents was about. Since the common drink throughout the Near East at the time was wine, to tell his parents, you must never drink wine. It doesn't say you must never drink wine until he's born. You must never drink wine, I believe, was to act as role models for their son as he was growing up in the house, to say, you need to take what is permitted to you and restrain yourself. You have to be in control. And that's what we're exemplifying with this restraint from wine. And hopefully Shimshon will learn that lesson and will be able to use his power and his strength only to uproot the enemies of Am Yisrael and to liberate them from the Plishtim, as opposed to for his own personal gain. What was Shimshon's scorecard? That's something that we'll leave for yet another shiur. In the meantime, everybody should have a wonderful Shabbat and enjoy the Haftarah and the opening story of Shimshon Hagibor.